So we just saw a video about wastewater treatment. That's if you live in an urban area. Typically, you're going to have your water treated by a wastewater treatment plant. Some people are going to have septic systems instead of a wastewater treatment plant. So what exactly does a septic system do? Well, it has a tank, and the wastewater goes into this tank, okay, and then the water moves out of the tank through gravity, okay, and the surrounding soil filters it. So just like you guys built a filter on Friday, okay, same thing happens here. The soil acts as the filter. So what happens here, though, it's not just like, oh, all the poop just goes into the dirt. All of the solid stuff settles down at the bottom of the septic tank into sludge. All of the liquid stuff runs off, and the liquid part is what is going to be filtered into this like drain field, okay? Every 5 to 10 years, the sludge at the bottom of this tank has to be removed. Some of you might have an above ground septic tank, meaning you have a tank in your yard, or you might have a below ground one. Here in Kenosha, a lot of them don't have this drain field. So what happens is you have to get it pumped more often because it doesn't actually have this drain field. So you might see that. But typically, if you live in town, most of your wastewater is going to be treated at a plant. So it's going to go and attach to pipes underground that will go to the wastewater treatment plant. So if you've ever seen one of these trucks, this is the truck that comes and pumps all of that out of your septic tank. Again, yeah, don't want that job. All of the sludge, the solid stuff, sinks to the bottom, right? And all of the liquid part is going to drain over into the soil, and then the soil is going to filter it. So we then get to wastewater or sewage treatment plants, same thing, just different ways of saying it. And they treat wastewater from thousands of households via underground pipes, and then they release it into a nearby river or a lake. And we can see, we saw some of those wastewater plants on the video, and we'll talk about the different steps that happen here. So we first have primary treatment, okay? Primary treatment is physical separation. So you saw they had lots of screens, okay? The big screens that are going to screen out any of like those rags or pieces of plastic or anything that's not supposed to be in there. That's really big. So physically separate the solids from the liquids. The solids are screened out, and then we have what they talked about, that grit chamber where all the solids settle out. Kind of like when we did that soil lab and you guys shook up the soil to see the different layers. Well, that soil settled down at the bottom, right? And so what happens is the sludge, the solid stuff, settles at the bottom, and then they just treat the water at the top. So you might ask, well, what happens to the sludge at the bottom? Well, they can turn it into manure or pellets for fertilizer because it has lots of nutrients. The secondary treatment is biological. So we use microorganisms to degrade some of that material. So we add a bunch of oxygen, as you saw, to keep the microorganisms happy. And we allow a lot of those microorganisms to be killed. Sometimes you'll hear tertiary treatment. That would be like disinfection, using chlorine or ozone, something like that. So again, this wastewater then is relatively clean and can be discharged back into a river. The sludge can be created into fertilizer or like manure, basically, for agricultural purposes or something else. So a lot of countries don't have a very sophisticated wastewater treatment plant. Imagine if you're in a country and they're just struggling to survive. They're not going to have the infrastructure, the structures like this to do this. Okay, they're just trying to get their government to survive. So they don't have this. So what happens to all their sewage? Well, it's pumped directly into a lake or into a river. Okay, so I've been in a lot of places where the rivers or the waters do not look very, very friendly because everything gets thrown in there. So during heavy rain, even in this country, okay, guess what? We end up pumping it into lakes without treating it. So during heavy rain, stormwater and wastewater overwhelms sewage plants, meaning there's too much water and the sewage plant can't treat it all. Because if you think about like a big flooding event, that's a lot of water, and all that stormwater is going into the water treatment plants. The plants then are allowed to pump water directly into a nearby body of water. So I'm going to show you, this is what happened. Do you guys remember when it was, there was a lot of flooding last summer? There was a lot of rain.
Well, now at noon, dumping into Lake Michigan. After months of heavy rain, millions of gallons of untreated wastewater going back into the lake. Wet weather certainly putting a strain on the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewage District.
Now, the tunnels and water treatment facilities are at or near capacity. Sean Gallagher spoke to the agency on how this is impacting our fresh water.
It has been a wet month, and it is having an impact on our rivers and the lake, with millions of gallons of wastewater going untreated.
It's a tremendous amount of water.
MMSD has had their work cut out for them. We've had roughly half a foot of rain over the last month in Milwaukee alone, and all of that water runoff needs to be processed.
If we get an inch of rain over a service area, that's 7.1 billion gallons of water with a B. And for comparison, the deep tunnel holds 521 million.
At the end of August, combined sewer overflows from those storms were estimated at over 295 million gallons. Less than 1 million gallons of that water was isolated, separate sewer overflow being pumped out into Lake Michigan. But MMSD says it's not as bad as it sounds.
Even with this wet year that we've had, we have captured and cleaned 98.5% of every drop of water that's gotten into the regional sewer system. And that's been the track record since 1994. That's our average.
But it's a big change from how it used to be before they installed the deep tunnel.
This was an open sewer. All the rivers were. That supported hardly any aquatic life because every time it rained, there would be a sewer overflow. Prior to the sewer systems being put in, all the sewage was just dumped right straight into the river.
And MMSD says if residents can cut down by just 10 gallons of water a day, it can have a significant impact on how quickly they treat this water. Along the Kinnickinnic River, Sean Gallagher, today's TMJ4.
Milwaukee Riverkeeper released the following statement in response to the overflow problem. Milwaukee Riverkeeper is concerned that MMSD has had their fifth sewage overflow of 2018. We as a community need to come together with our city leaders and leaders at MMSD to aggressively address this problem and devise innovative solutions to fix our old and failing infrastructure.
So I wanted to show that to you. They had their sixth sewage overflow in a year, and that's more than they have had since 1998. So it was because of a combination of things that led to, lots of rain in that year, lots of big heavy rain events. And with climate change, right, we would expect those heavy rain events to increase, okay? Our other options for treating wastewater, you guys don't have a ton of space to write this, so I would just write the first sentence here. A manure lagoon is one option. What is a manure lagoon? Well, it's a big pond lined with rubber that stores manure, okay? And this can be one option for treating. A lot of times they will use bacteria to break down the manure and then spread it into farm fields, and this is used primarily with agriculture. So if they have a lot of animal waste on a farm, right? So think about all of those concentrated animal feeding operations, all of those pigs, all those cows in big areas, got to muck out their stalls. Where are you going to put all that? And so a lot of times what they do is they'll put it in this lagoon. The problem is sometimes we get risks because there's leaking in the liner, or we don't filter out specific compounds. And so there's some risks to using manure lagoons as well. When we talk about animal waste, it's really hard to control because animals poop, right? And sometimes that poop can get washed into the riverways, and that can cause the same problems as human waste. So what are we going to do about it? there's some natural things that we can do to reduce agricultural runoff, okay? So we can keep a cover crop on the field to prevent erosion. So anytime we've got soil that's eroding away, it can bring some of that animal waste with it, okay? So if we have a cover crop or if we have crops on there holding the soil in place, it's less likely to erode away. We can reduce runoff by using something called a riparian zone. Take a look at this picture. Here's a river. It has a riparian zone. What's a riparian zone? What do you see? Trees, right? Why would we want to plant trees next to a river? So the roots are going to hold the soil in place, but trees are really thirsty. If anyone's ever grown a tree, it needs lots and lots of water. So what happens is it can suck up a lot of that water that's headed for the river, a lot of that runoff water, and instead of having it go into the river, now it can go into the tree roots. And so we get less of that fertilizers ending up in the river. Okay, you might also hear it called a buffer, right? It's a buffer area. Artificial wetland. Wetlands help filter water. So if we make a man-made wetland, okay, that could help filter out some of those toxic things that we have in our agricultural system. Or we could build a retention pond, a pond that's going to store water, okay, from runoff. Remember, we have integrated pest management. That's a solution as well, where we use lots of different things. We use biological controls. We use cultural methods, barriers, and we can use pesticides, but it reduces how many pesticides we end up using. So those are some options when we get to agricultural runoff. All right, what I need you to do is get out your big review packet. I'm going to come around and see what you have done. I wanted you to get up to through page 6 done. I am putting it in the grade book. If you are not done, it's not a big deal. Okay, I'm putting it in the grade book, and whenever you get it done, tomorrow, today, next week, you can show it to me. Okay, we're doing a page a day, so I would like you to work on page 7 at least. You could obviously go further than that.